Good afternoon, everybody, and thanks for joining us on today's webinar. Today, I've invited Chris Wilson from the Microsoft Police Customer Success team to share some of the developments in relation to the capabilities of Microsoft lists and how we can make them work to underpin our tasking coordination processes, how we can have a fully audited capability to help drive forward the way that we work and to use what we've already got within the build to use things. And one of the things that I'm really interested in hearing about is adaptive cards and how they can surface information and make it available to our users using Teams. Personally, I think that some of these opportunities and improvements are a real opportunity for any team or department to have a step change in the way they coordinate the way and manage tasks. It could be within a small department coordinating across what tasks in a very defined process, or it could be the whole force tasking and intelligence process. The foundations of this is really important, and we've already seen some great examples of this in other forces. Many colleagues are aware of the fantastic work that's been done in forces, particularly in Derbyshire, where they have their force-wide intelligence and tasking process running across Microsoft Teams, but that's underpinned with Planner. But one of the challenges Derbyshire had to overcome when developing that process was ensuring the data was fully audited and recorded, so that data couldn't accidentally be deleted or deleted in the wrong way, and that it was retained in line with MOPI and other policies. Of course, they were able to implement a solution that provided that reassurance, and at the heart of that process was the MS Planner tool. And that's a fantastic tool used by lots of colleagues every day to track work in there as a single user or as a small group for projects, etc. It can be really good. But one of the potential weaknesses is that data could be deleted from planning, meaning that regular users wouldn't be able to access it. Now, I've been a massive fan of Microsoft lists for some time and started to understand how they work and how they do things. And I always thought that lists was a function based on Planner. And the reality, of course, it's not. They were two separate products developed separately. So what we want to do is to perhaps look at how we can now use the Microsoft lists, Power Automate and Teams together to ensure that our data is more flexible, it's easier to use, and we've got the functionality that forces need to be able to task, whether in a department, it could be uniform stores, or that intel and tasking process to make it easier and to have that customized view to it. And one of the most powerful things with lists is you can make that data visible in lots of different ways and elements of that data visible in different ways. So, Chris, let's bring you in now. If you want to share your screen so it's ready, and we'll pop you on screen. One of the big advantages of lists is Power Automate and Teams and making sure the data can't be deleted. But why are lists more suitable to managing police tasks and coordination than perhaps Planner has been in the past?
Thanks, David. Good afternoon, everybody. So I think for me, there's probably three main reasons why you might want to look to utilise lists now instead of Planner. And obviously I'm sharing my screen as well, so you can see an example of a list. The first one really on top of my list would be sort of the customization options. So as opposed to Planner, where you've got very specific field names each time, here for lists, as you can see, we've got field names that are going to be a little bit more appropriate to the particular task in hand. So as opposed to just having the title and the various fields associated with Planner, you can customize lists to be whatever you want it to be to make it a little bit more suitable for you. So you can see on here that we've got an example list which is looking at a daily tasking view, so the same sort of solution that Derbyshire used for within Planner. And here we've added our own fields, and you mentioned there about views as well. One of the nice additions to lists is that sort of Kanban board view that we can now do with lists as well, which makes it look a little bit more like Planner as well. So I can go into here and I can have a look at a different list, which then people familiar with Planner might see that this actually looks very, very similar to that. The other two reasons I would suggest using lists now is one you've mentioned, David, around the audit capabilities. So with Planner, yes, Derbyshire got around it using Power Automate, but there's still that potential of deletion and being able to recover from deletion. With lists, because it's based on SharePoint, we've got both protection against deletion, we've got options to have a look at versioning, and we've also got much more options around permissions within those list items as well. And then finally on my list of three would be sort of the integration opportunities as well. So we've got opportunities with lists to do things like use Power Automate on there. We can do things like look at Power BI, so we can very quickly have a look at getting a report on all those list items with Power BI. And I will just click on that button right now, just to show you how quick and easy that is to visualize the content within that list. And then we can also go a little bit further and add Power Apps to the equation as well. So yeah, those are my three main reasons why I would suggest, maybe looking at lists now instead of Planner.
That's fabulous, and certainly, as you start getting into this, you do learn a lot more about that customizability. So how do you manage the fields in a list and ensure the quality of information? Because that's always a challenge for policing. So how do you manage those fields in there?
Yeah, so a couple of things. If we go into the list settings within here, we can see that we've got all of the fields and all of the columns essentially that we've got within that particular view. So you can see we've got different types of those columns as well. So where we've got, obviously a title is just a single line of text, but that reason for tasking that we've got in here is now a choice field. So we can be very, very prescriptive and very rigid in what that reason for tasking is. So rather than saying, here's a free text field on what that reason for tasking is, which means you could get lots and lots of different entries in there and non-consistent entries. Here we can say, well, actually, these are going to be our reasons for tasking, and people are going to need to, people using the list are going to need to select one of those options. You can also do things like putting in specific checks on there and formulas to make sure that the entries are valid. So if you've got something like number fields in there, you can make sure that actually it is below 100,000 arrests or something like that. So it is actually valid data within there. And as I say, around the sort of customizability of lists, here we've got a number of examples of columns, which we've basically taken from sort of that Derbyshire planning view that we mentioned. But you could add anything on here that you like. So it's very, very quick to add additional columns within here. Simply create a column, and then we've got lots of different options around what type of data is going to be held within that column.
That's really good. Now, we've already had a question in, and I'll bring this in straight away. Is there a difference between an MS list and a SharePoint list?
No, so they're based on SharePoint. So if you're thinking there around the sort of, if we go into sort of the list application within here, you'll still see that all of these lists here are based on SharePoint as well. So you might see that they're actually based on, you might think that they're based on Teams, but that's still based on the SharePoint site underneath that team as well.
I think that's really an important point, that this data and this whole thing with 365 is the data might exist in one place, but it's visible in different ways and accessible in different ways using different tools. So this is a really powerful part of the thing, to think about the data in a different way. Now, one of the things that comes up, Planner is really easy to use. So you can set up a planner and the buckets and adapt them very, very quickly. Surely setting this up is going to take a lot longer. Isn't that a disadvantage or not?
Yes, I mean, it will take a little bit of time to set this up and create those fields and create those columns. But I think, for me, the advantages of being able to fully customize that to whatever you want it to be are going to far outweigh the fact that it's going to take you a little bit of time to set those up in the first place. So we can be very, very bespoke with this. And we'll come on to this in a little while anyway, but things like setting up views, we can do that a lot more easily once we've got that in the list. And as I say, you've got this still sort of simple Kanban board view that you've got with Planner, where we can just drag these from one bucket to another. It's very similar to Planner there as well.
And of course, you can still manipulate the properties of the lists and the columns like you can in Planner after you've created it as well, can't you, Chris?
Yeah, absolutely. So maybe, we're going through here and actually we want to either add additional columns or we want to change some of those column names. All of that's possible within the list settings. My only caveat on that and my only little bit of advice there would be just think about, you're better to get that done ahead of time. So I would try and be quite firm in the fact that we've created that list, and we're not necessarily going to make those changes, because if you've got integrations with Power BI and Power Apps, those are the types of things which may cause you problems later down the line. If all of a sudden you change all the column names, that's then going to affect any reports that you've got on there, or any automations that you've got off the back of that list as well.
That's fantastic. One of the things that I like most in there is the people option, where you can have it linked to your directory, and it brings up you're searching for a user's name and it pops it in for you. And then of course you've got the picture as well if you want that as well. So that's really powerful. Of course, in policing, the levels of scrutiny and audit are absolutely huge, and quite rightly. How can forces be assured that the data is always kept in the system and kept secure?
Yeah, so as we mentioned at the start, then we've got a lot more options than we've got with Planner. So because we've got this base of SharePoint, the retention of those items is going to depend on your organizational retention settings. I guess one of the most important things to note here is that I can still delete this right now. That's due to my level of permissions. You could go to you could go further down and actually start restricting individual list items if you wanted to. So we could change the permissions on list items to prevent people from deleting in the first place. But the other thing that we've got on here is that, if we do accidentally delete it, or somebody does something that they shouldn't do on there, because we're based on SharePoint, we've still got that held within a recycle bin. So you can see on here that robbery item that we've just deleted is in that recycle bin, and we can then just go very, very simply back and restore it, which is something that wasn't possible at all with Planner. So the other things that we've got on here, if I go back to the list on here, so content and daily tasking, is the versioning option as well. So if I go back to show all items within here, and I have a look at one of the incident names on here, I've also got this version history. So again, we wouldn't have this with Planner. We've got all of the version history held within that item. We can see when it was modified, who it was modified by, and we could go back and actually have a look at that version as well. So I could say, right, what does that look like at this particular point in time? So those retention settings are going to depend on your organizational settings as well. So if you've got org level settings of retain everything forever, you're going to retain everything on SharePoint forever.
So this is the point that SharePoint lists are based in the SharePoint wrapper. So all the retention policies that are in place through the force, through the build, etc., all can be applied to this automatically. And so you've got that assurance that the data is held, it's audited, it's accessible, everything you need. So moving on, so you've got the data in there, it's all being created. How can you create filtered views so that different teams can focus on the right information? Because that's a really important part of this.
Yeah, so as you can see up here on the right hand side, we've got this a view at the moment for all items. We have been through and created some additional views on here as well. So we've got what we've called here as a force-wide overview, which is looking at the area of impact of each of these particular incidents. And then we've got additional views for things like Sheffield or Barnsley, which is basically going to give you a filtered view of those particular list items. So we can go into there, we can have a look at the list settings again, and down the bottom of this page you have our various views. So if we have a look at the Sheffield view on here, what we've done is we've got the options to say which columns we're going to include in that particular view, but then we've got options down here to say actually, right, what's the filter on there. So we've got that we're only going to show the area of impact that contains the word Sheffield, or if the area of impact contains force-wide, so if it affects all forces or all areas within that force, then we will display that for Sheffield as well. And we're also saying actually if that list item is not archived, so once it gets archived, we'll remove it from our particular view as well. And you could create filtered views for any of the columns that you've got held in that list item as well.
So before we go on to where you can then display those views, we are going to have a workshop in a couple of weeks' time on the 26th of May, and the link will be popped into the chat in a second for you to register. It's on the PDS events website, where Chris will join us again, and we'll go into even more detail in a more interactive workshop to be able to address that, because in half an hour we can't get right into the detail and show all the options. We're going to do that in a workshop. This is to give you that taste to be able to get more into there. So Chris, going back to the key points on this, so you've created the different views. Where else could the data be presented to help the users access it?
So the other thing that you can do is we can show this in Teams. So we've already just briefly stepped onto that sort of list application now. So there is a list application. There's also a new desktop version of lists that you can download and have a specific application on your device as well if you wanted. But the other thing that we've got as well is showing a list view within Teams. So for this particular example here, we have a daily tasking team, which the SharePoint list is based on the SharePoint site underneath. And then we've got a tab at the top here, which shows us, again, that list view, that daily tasking list view. So we can have that there. You could link that through to any team, and you can have the same view within the teams. So here we've still got all the options for having different views within Teams, but it means I don't need to step out to go and find the SharePoint page. I don't need to know the location of that. I can access it directly within Teams as well.
Okay, so it has still got all the security that you need to filter so not everybody's accessing it.
Yeah, absolutely. So it's all based on the list permissions. And one thing I mentioned earlier was actually, do you know what, if we don't necessarily need to give access to the whole list for people. If you didn't want to, you could go down to and be very granular with it and say, right, actually, we're quite restrictive on this particular list, but I need an officer in a totally different department to just have access to this particular list item. So I can give, we've got here on the permissions that this is what's giving permissions onto this list item, but I can give direct permissions to somebody if I wanted to, and they wouldn't have a list, they wouldn't have access to anything else on the list apart from that single item.
No problem. And Power BI is the other one as well, isn't it, Chris?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. So as I showed earlier, we've got this the Power BI view as well. And this is just the visualization of that list. So it's a pre-built report for us. But what you can do once that data is in lists, there's so much you can do within Power BI to build up your own templates and build up your own Power BI reports. So you can very, very quickly, again, we've got tasking as an example here, see how many tasks are open, how many tasks have been closed in the last 24 hours across various areas of impact, what's the sort of knife crime, any sort of statistics like that in reports, which are very easy for people to consume and visualize.
Now, we all know everybody's under immense pressure, and no matter which department you're in, there isn't enough hours in the day, there isn't enough hours on the clock, let's be honest. So it's really important we do get data to the right people at the right time, and that's at the heart of the current digital data and technology strategy. So it's great that information can be easily found, but how do we push notifications to people, and how do we get tasking information to the right people?
Yeah, absolutely. So there's a couple of ways we can do that. One thing that we can do directly from the list is we can go into the list item and we can alert me. So something where potentially you need to keep maybe a senior officer advised on that particular list item or that particular task. What you can do is you can come into here and you can send alerts to individuals. So actually, we'll send an alert to Alex Wilbur anytime there's any changes on this list item. So rather than me being the middleman and my commanding officer coming to me and saying, Chris, can you keep me up to date on that particular task, I can alert that person directly from here as well. So that takes that sort of step out of it. The other thing that we can do on here is we can then integrate with Power Automate. So we've got some examples created where anytime one of these items is updated, I will get alerts into Teams. So we can see on here, let me just show you some of those Power Automates that we've created. We've got we've got 3 examples on here. So anytime a task is updated, notify the person who that's allocated to. Once notify a user when a new item is created and allocated to me, and also notify the tasking team whenever a task is deleted as well. So if I go into here just quickly and create a new example for us, so we'll say this is another robbery. We will just run through this really quickly. So that was that. Reason for tasking resourcing, and allocate that to Grady. And save that.
And that can be a team or an individual, can't it, Chris, that you allocate to?
Yeah, you can allocate it to more than one person, and equally what we've said on here is that this is an example that we have here. So you could also have multiple fields. So we've had some questions around the football user case. Again, is based on lists, where you can have multiple people assigned to it. So we can have the DFU that's assigned to that particular item. We can also have a bronze and silver commander that's assigned to that particular list item as well. So what that will do is that will now I've created that. Take a couple of minutes, but I'll do one that I've created earlier as well. You can see on here that we've got some notifications that previously Alex modified a task that was assigned to me, and we also have new tasks assigned. So we've got this burglary task that I created yesterday has also been assigned to me. Couple of ways that we can do that. So you'll see on here that actually we've got some buttons on here, and that will take us on nicely to an adaptive card. So this is an adaptive card within Teams.
And my inner geek likes the idea of these adaptive cards and improving the user experience. So let's take us through that. And we have got some questions we'll come to in a minute, but take us through what adaptive cards are. And again, we will cover this in the workshop in a couple of weeks' time.
So essentially, an adaptive card is it can be a notification within Teams, but rather than a static notification of just some text, which again I'll have I will have an example of. If I have a look at just tasking team within here, this is an example of just one of those sort of static notifications. So it's written in HTML, which is a bit of code. We can still view the task, but actually it's not particularly visually appealing. What we can do with adaptive cards is do things like have buttons on there. So we can do things like, here it's a very simple example of being able to view that particular item, but we can take that a little bit further and be able to respond to items as well. So a quick example of that, although it's not related to tasking, is under the guest request process. So we have this guest approval hub here. And this is another example of an adaptive card where we've had a guest request come in, and we can just directly approve or reject that particular guest, and that will go back to Power Automate, and then it will do something with that answer. So whatever you can think of in terms of getting a card to a user or to a channel, somebody being able to update it directly there, and then the workflow can then carry on afterwards.
And that's really important. It's about responding and updating the tasks as well. So that's where the adaptive cards provide the link through to where they can do the update.
Yeah, absolutely. So, if I come back to here, this is the guest request declined one. But here at the moment, again, just as an example, we've got the options within this particular list item just to view that directly. So it means as a user, if I'm assigned that particular task, I can just click on view and it's going to take me directly to that task to update it. So it means I don't have to continually be there looking at the list, making sure that I'm keeping up to date with it and getting it updated. It's continues sort of within my flow of work. Here's the list of item that you need to update, and it can take me directly there.
That's fantastic. And you don't need to be a super techie to start developing these adaptive cards. They are built so that you can do them yourself, and that's the really important part.
I was going to say they are based on a little bit of code, but what we do have, and the link will be put into the chat as well, is there's this adaptive card designer now as well. So This link will be shared with you, but it means that actually you can come into here and you can start to bring in elements into what you want your adaptive card to look like, and it will write the code for you down here. So yeah, you do need a little bit of technology for it, but not super techy to do it.
Thank you, Chris. So there's some real opportunity here to use that technology, and there's 38 forces all already rolling out all the things you've used today that they can use now without any additional cost or any additional infrastructure. That's all good to go now. So we really do want people to use that. So please do come along to the workshop on the 26th of May. You need to register for it. This is a police only audience. So if you register for that, we'll send you the invite through. I'm going to run through a few questions now, Chris, and please keep your questions coming in if we can. So first question is from Joe, who's used lists a lot since 365 was introduced, but one thing they've struggled with is moving a list created in my account or OneDrive and move it into our SharePoint team. Is there any advice you've got around that, or do we need to really start in the right place?
I would be thinking about starting in the right place. I mean, you can export them and you can export them out to Excel and potentially import them again. But there'll be a little bit of work required with that to make sure that the columns are correct. One thing that we are doing, probably worth noting as well, as we go through and we're doing more and more lists within working with policing, what we're trying to do is we're trying to create some automation for you to create some of these lists for you automatically as well. So I would say just keep an eye on the sort of PDS catalog, any sort of apps and things that we can share on there, which will pre-create a list for you. They'll be shared on there as well.
And that was a question we've had from Joe about templates, that we are going to look at putting these into the solutions catalog and enable more access to that. So please do keep an eye on that. Or if you've got anything that you've developed and would like to share, then please get in touch with us, because that'll be really helpful for others to be able to use. Another question we've got is, can you get automated emails for upcoming lists, tasks in lists? So I think you covered that with the Power Automate. It could be a Teams update email or both, couldn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. So, we've opted for Teams within these Power Automates. So we've opted to post a message into a chat or channel. If you'd rather an email, then yes, absolutely, you could do that as well. So it would just be a slight change in one of these automates to send an email to the affected user or the assigned user within here.
Yeah. And there's a question here about the Kanban view. Have you set up that as a bespoke, or is that a standard template part of the lists anyway?
No, it is standard, so we can create a new view. So on here you can see, actually I've just gone to create a new view, and I can do that as a gallery or a board. So now that's the Kanban board type view, and then I can organize the board by this is essentially your buckets within Planner. So it's the same type of thing as the buckets within Planner. So I can say I want to order that board by the status, which is where I can then drag them from one status to another. So back on here, this view is organized by status and means I can move them from one bucket to the other in there.
Thank you. Running out of time, one last question is, can an individual user turn off the alerts without them others being aware, or is that something that can be stopped globally?
No, so because it's all based on one flow, so the flow is there, they wouldn't be able to turn off that flow. So the alerts will still go through.
That's fantastic. Thanks, Chris. So please do jump in to register for the workshop in a couple of weeks' time. Next week, we're planning to bring you a update on a power app that's been developed by our colleagues in the Met, which is suitable for all forces. In fact, the national lead around tasers asked for that this is made available, and we're just making that available in the solutions catalog. And we're going to introduce the taser deployment review app, so you can have a look at that. Please do come along next week when you can join us, and do please let us know if you've got anything you've developed that you could share with other forces, that we can pop it into the PDS Enabling Centre and Solutions Catalogue. So again, you can use that to your heart's content. We do want to see more and more contributions for that. It is something we've committed to it in the PDS to keep going with. It's on screen now. The link is available in the chat. If you have any problems, please get in touch with us through the website, and we can give you access to the Solutions Catalogue, the Enabling Centre, where there's a lot more content going to be there for you able to do. And remember that you can subscribe to our videos on the YouTube channel, the PDS YouTube channel, get notified when there's new webinars available to you. So please do to keep up to date with us, we're always having webinars on demand available to you. There's the events that are coming up in the next couple of weeks. We have got the summit next week. We are doing a webinar next week, and then Thursday, Friday we have the summit, and in a couple of weeks time after that, for those of you that aren't able to make the summit, Ian Bell will be joining us and we'll do a review of the summit on one of the Wednesday webinars, so please do look to join us soon. So thanks Chris for joining us today. Speak to you soon.